and I'm going to shut the door. And when you want to start talking about records, just wave at me, and I'll come back in for the repossession county.
All right. My name is Joshua Schubert. I am here today in affiliation with Elias. The veteran I brought here today is Gilbert Rank. Today is March 12th, 2018, and we are in the Elias Catholic High School library. As a starting question, just a few formalities. When and where were you born?
I was born in Cole County, Jefferson City, about, at that time it was about 7 miles south on Highway 54, and I was born May the 26th, 1933.
What were your parents' names, and what were their occupations?
My dad's name was Nicholas, and my mom's name was Adelia, and they lived and worked on the farm.
Yeah. Who were your siblings? What were their names, and did any of them serve in the military?
Well, my older brother's name was Emil, and the next one was Arthur, and he was in the military. He was drafted into the Army in 1941, December the 5th, 2 days before the war with Japan started, and he served until April of 1945.
Mm-hmm. And Art also served in the military, right?
Arthur.
Arthur.
Yeah, that's what I meant, Arthur.
Oh, Arthur.
Yes. Emil was not in the military.
Emil wasn't?
No, well, they had the custom back then, if there wasn't any boys left, after they drafted one, they gave them a farm deferment if they worked on the farm. And he had a farm deferment.
And since you were so young, you were
Yes.
you were excluded from that.
Right.
Now, what did you do before you were drafted into the service?
Well, I worked on a farm and I worked on a sawmill, and I was working on the farm because I had to. I was in high school in the 10th grade when I came home from school one afternoon, and my brother had a tremendous accident, and as a result his leg was amputated, and I had to quit school and work on the farm. So I worked on the farm and worked on a sawmill, and my other brother had a livestock truck, and I helped him when I could to load livestock and haul to St. Louis.
And then, what was I going to say? Alright. Now, getting on to your military service record. In which branch did you serve?
In the Army.
In the Army. And you were drafted, of course.
Yes.
Prior to
Yes.
Korea.
Yes.
Do you remember your draft date?
Yes, I received my draft notice April the 1st, 1953. I was inducted into the Army May the 14th, 1953. And my separation from the Army was April the 28th, 1955. And then I was in the reserves, and I was discharged totally from the Army May the 31st, 1961.
Now, what happened when you were leaving for boot camp, and then in the early days of your training?
Well,
Might not
those-
be too graphic.
those were times quite a bit different than they are now. And I had never been anywhere or really done anything except just live on the farm. And if you can imagine, back in those days, we didn't even have electricity. There was no bathroom, no water in the house, none of that stuff, and so I had never been anywhere or done anything, and then I was drafted into the Army. I was kind of looking forward to it, but I didn't have any idea what to expect. And we were loaded on the bus one day and hauled to Kansas City, and there was quite a few of us. At the time I was 19, and we went to this big building in Kansas City and went up on the second floor, and it was well, it was a huge building to me, and they had a big square painted on the floor, and there was 160 of us, and we stood around this square in equal numbers, and first thing they had us do was take off all of our clothes, and I thought, wow, it's something I've never seen in my life, you know. And we did all kinds of things to be examined. And then they formed us up and and had us stand there and repeat after them. And we repeated what they told us to say. And they said, take one step forward, and we did. And they said, you're now in the United States Army. You are no longer your own. You belong to Uncle Sam. And I didn't quite grasp what that meant for a little while.
Pretty straightforward about that then, right?
Yes, and then very short time, like an hour later, they took us down to the train station, and we got on the train and we rode a long ways, and that was the first time I ever had a train ride too, by the way. And we went to Camp Crowder down by Neosho, Missouri. And they took us off the train, and we walked down to these barracks, and they would put a number of us in each room down through the barracks, and there was metal cots in there with a rolled up mattress, and I quickly rolled mine out and lay down because I was tired. And a little bit later, they came by throwing buckets in the rooms and brushes and soap.
Sorry. Continue on.
And they yelled, GI party, and I thought, hey, this is great. Little did I realize we was getting ready to scrub the floor for a few hours and a few things like that. And then we were allowed to sleep a little bit, and we got up early the next morning, and they fed us some Army chow, and then they marched us out on this huge field and had us stand shoulder width apart, and we got down on our knees and started pulling grass and moving forward. And there were people there dressed all kinds of ways. My brother told me, don't wear anything that you're not willing to throw away in about 3 days' time. My cousin went in the same day I did, and he had on a suit and horn-rimmed glasses and a hat and a tie, and he was right beside me pulling grass on his knees. So, and 3 days later, the Army issued us boots and clothing, and we threw our old clothes away.
Now, do you remember your instructors? Now, what were they like?
Well, they were extremely strict, and this was when the Korean War was still going on. The war ended, or that is, they had an armistice in June, and this was May, a month before the war. They had an armistice, and they were extremely strict, and they used physical force on us. We could expect to be hit or kicked or whatever, and of course I didn't understand that at the present time, but that's the way it was. So we learned very quickly to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut and do what you were told.
You didn't have to learn any of those lessons, did you?
No.
Did you have specialized training?
Well, yes, I did. When I went into basic training, I rode a bus to Fort Riley, Kansas for my basic training. And the first 10 days there, I spent on what they called KP, Kitchen Police. And they had me work on the back sink because there were big racks on the wall, and you washed the big pans on the back sink and put them up on these racks. And since I was tall, I could reach up there and move those pots around. So I spent the first 10 days on KP. And then took basic training. And at the end of, they had a long cycle, they called it, and a short cycle. The long cycle was 16 weeks and the short cycle was 8 weeks. And I drew the 8-week cycle, the short cycle, and at the end of 8 weeks, I went into intermediate speed code radio operator school. And that's where you use the Morse code. And I didn't like that at all from the very first day. But I progressed along in it and got up to about 13 words a minute, and I was trying to figure out how to get out of there and do something else if I could. And so me and a few buddies of mine were noticing that the guys who couldn't do it were flunking out, and then they would take them and put them in various schools, like truck driver schools, wireman school, whatever. And we thought, hey, that's much better than what we're doing. So the next day we had a test and 3 of us flunked out. And out of 100, being able to score 100 on a test, I scored 11 and my buddy scored 9. And naturally we got out. So the captain talked to us that afternoon. He said, well, looks like you guys can't do this anymore, so we'll see if we can't do something about that. So they sent us back to the infantry, and we took 16 more weeks of basic training, infantry. And I certainly knew how to do infantry weapons at the end of that time. Now, some more advanced training I had when I got overseas in Germany.
All right. Now, how did you adapt to life there in the service there in the early days? What was it like for you trying to adapt?
Well, it was a whole new world. But really, my brother had told me, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut and don't volunteer for anything. And I found out very quickly never to volunteer for anything, because they would ask you to volunteer to drive a truck, for example, and if you volunteered, you wound up with a wheelbarrow hauling rocks or something. So I learned real quickly to just wait and be told what to do. And I was in various training like that, infantry type training, until December of 1953. And then I was going to be sent somewhere else, so I received a short furlough to come home and be at home for a week. And then I reported back, and I was sent to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and loaded onto a troop ship, the Alexander M. Patch, and rode this troop ship to Germany. And that was quite an experience.
Well, then that just leads into my next question of where did you serve?
In Germany.
Right.
Yes.
Now, do you have any specific memories from being over there?
In Germany?
Yeah, especially in the early days of having arrived.
Yes. When we finally got there, we spent 8 days on this troop ship, which was really an eye-opener. And so when I got to Bremerhaven, Germany, which was the embarkation center, I noticed very quickly that you couldn't understand anything these people said. You couldn't read their signs or anything. And we very quickly were loaded onto a train, and we were hauled down through Germany till we got to Nuremberg. And Nuremberg was the home of the headquarters and service company of the 371st Armored Infantry Battalion. And so that's where I was stationed.
Now, since you weren't on the front lines there were no front lines, of course, except for
No,
the-
there was no combat. We
Right.
were there, it had been a few years since the war was over.
Right.
Now, the place was still in rubble. A lot of big piles of bricks and stuff like that, and these German people had nothing. There was almost a total absence of men, and the ones you did see, a lot of them had lost a limb or had big scars on them or something, and because they had been through the war, and so many of them had been killed.
Right. Now, since there wasn't, yeah, you can go ahead. If you need to get a drink or something like that, just
Yep.
go on ahead. Now, since there were no front lines to fight on, what sort of duties did you have to perform? What were your duties while you were there?
It was always training. At that point in time, we were concerned about confronting the Russians. They were very active in their training and challenging towards us, and every day we prepared for maybe having to actually go into a combat situation. We pulled border guard quite a bit on the Czechoslovakian border, and the Russians would actually challenge us and we never did know for sure if they were going to come across that border or not. And they kept us up in war games like that all the time. We spent most of our time out in the field, but quite often we'd be in the barracks in Nuremberg, and it was the barracks of the SS Kaserne, which was Hitler's elite troopers. And there was big buildings there, brick buildings, and they had very thick walls and everything, and even though there had been a lot of bombing, those buildings were pretty sturdy, and they stood up. It was all the houses and the businesses that were totally destroyed.
Now, when you were over there, you were talking about training. So whenever you were over there, you did demolitions training, right?
Well, it was infantry training at first, and I was in a reconnaissance platoon, and in a reconnaissance platoon, you have a small group of vehicles, and you're designed and built for moving fast so you can recon. We had 5 Jeeps, 2 M41 tanks, 2 T-38 armored personnel carriers. We had a half-track and some trucks, and we would go out and we were just like a small group moving on our own. We did a lot of practicing and training, and then in this training, later after I had, they asked for volunteers to go to demolition school. And I thought, well, I believe I'll try that. So I volunteered, and they sent me to Murnau, Germany to be trained in demolitions. And it was an 8-week school, and I was so interested in it that I really got into it. And there were 90-some students sent there, and of that group I finished 3rd. And as a result of that, I received a lot of recommendations, and I actually got a promotion out of it too. And when I came back to my company area after the school, I had been promoted to corporal, and I was the NCO demolitions expert for the battalion in Nuremberg. And then as a result of that, we did a lot of training with the infantry people, and the infantry would be out in the field, and they would approach where we were the aggressor force. Excuse me. And I would have on a helmet with a wood gadget on the top that they could see from a distance with binoculars and tell that we were the enemy. You know, and I would have some demolition things set up so that when they called in fire on my position, I would set off a nitro starch charge, which would shoot some smoke up in the air and make a big boom. And unfortunately, we had no hearing protection at all. And as a result of that, I sustained some hearing damage, which I've had all my life since then.
Right.
But we did a lot of training, and every evening when we were not in the barracks, we had operation, what we called ORC at 4:30, Operation Readiness Check. And every vehicle we checked to make sure that they were full of fuel, full of oil, and ammunition was readily available and all this. And so we kept all of our vehicles up to snuff all the time.
Now, while you were on your tour of duty, what kinds of friendships did you make with your compatriots?
Well, you make a lot of buddies, and you get to know a number of people who have similar wants that you do, and they conduct themselves somewhat like you do. There were all kinds of people in the Army. And you had to be careful with your relationships because they came from a lot of big towns in the East, and they were into a lot of things that we didn't even know about back here in Missouri. And as a result, you had to be careful. Yeah.
Now, how did you stay in touch with home?
Wrote letters. That was the only way. You could have a call and use the phone, but it was very expensive. And so writing letters was the only thing.
Did you ever make any calls to home, or you all didn't have any?
One time.
One time?
Yes.
All right. Now, what did you do while you were off duty?
Well, unfortunately, there was very little I could do because I never had any money. I only got paid $71 a month. Now, out of that $71, they took out a mandatory life insurance premium, which was, I believe it was like $8 or $10. And I don't know why I did it, but I traded cars before I went to the Army. And so I had a car payment back home, $42 a month. So when you take all these things out, there was very little left. And that was every month, and there was no hope of anything changing. So when we got paid, well, there were several of us just like that, didn't have any money, and we would walk downtown to a place called the Greek Hillbilly. And of course, it was a pretty raucous place, and they served lots of beer and sandwiches and things, and we would go in there and we would get a shot of Steinhager, which was a liquor like pure alcohol. Mm-hmm. And we would drink that so that we could get accustomed to the party or something. And then we would get a beer and order a pizza, and then we had spent our allowance. That was it. And after that, we'd walk back to the barracks. Not very exciting.
Well, you know. All right. Now, this next section covers more towards the end and after completing those few years that you spent there in Germany. How did you return home after serving?
Well, we came back on that troop ship again, and it was just like going over to start with, and however we knew what was going to happen. It's terrible to be uh, crowded into a troop ship and not be able to go anyplace for 8 days while you're on that ocean. And it's a horrible ride on the ocean. That ship is rocking around, and it's very difficult, and it don't stop. I mean, we think of things here like we get on a boat or something, ride a little ways and get off. But when you're on a troop ship, you don't get off until you get to where you're going. And so it made me appreciate a lot of things while I was on there.
Now, on the trip home, where you said on the trip over, earlier you had said on the trip over that you all weren't allowed to go up on the deck because everything had iced over.
The decks were what they call a wash.
Right.
And the hatches were battened down, which means you couldn't get out on the deck. The waves actually would go over the deck of the ship. It was that rough. And coming back, we only had that one day. The rest of the time, the ocean was quite calm, and we could go up and walk around and really enjoy it. And when you're on the ocean like that, and you look out, it looks like you're kind of in a low place looking up. And you can actually see about 15 miles. When you're standing on the deck and look out on a clear day, you can see about 15 miles.
Now, whenever you came back home, how did the family receive you?
Oh, very well, because they were looking forward to me coming home, you know. And I had a girlfriend, and she was looking forward to it too. And then we were thinking about getting married. We'd been writing letters, of course, and so when I got back, we started planning to get married, and we did.
And you went on to have how many kids?
Beg your pardon?
How many kids did you all have?
I had 5.
5 children?
Yes.
And what were their names?
Valerie, Michelle, Andy, Jeff, and Jennifer. Very nice family. And of course they're grown and they have children now. So we not only have children, we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And you'll be around to see the great-great-grandchildren too, right?
Hopefully.
Now, how did you readjust to civilian life?
Well, when I got out of the Army, I decided I looked forward to getting back and start farming. And I tried to do that at first, but I recognized very quickly that it did not have the ability to support me when I was married and raising a family. So I became familiar with a man who was a book salesman. He was a manager for him, selling the Book of Knowledge, and he talked to me about going to work, which I did, and started doing some traveling, selling books, and did a good job. And they promoted me too quick, and so then I was in charge of 4 people, and those people always needed gas money. They needed work on their transmission, all this kind of stuff, and it always kept me broke. I was selling, helping them guys out, and it kept me broke. So one day I decided that was not for me. And I saw an ad in the paper with Jefferson City Baking Company. And so I went and applied, and the man hired me on the spot, and I worked for them for about 2 years. And they started working me out in some various towns, and I wasn't at home much, and when I was tired, and so I decided to do something else. And I quit, and a man called me and hired me to work in a farm implement company, Case Tractor, Vidal Implement Company in Jefferson City on Mulberry Street. And I worked there a year and a half, and then I was building a house, and very small house, and the man who came and sold me windows hired me away from the tractor company to start selling windows. So I did. And I worked for that company about a year. And here again, they had me doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, like helping to put up doors and windows and all that. And so I decided, well, if I'm going to do that, why don't I just go in business for myself? Now, I had no training in business, and that's quite a detriment. You have to know what you're doing when you go into business. Mm-hmm. And I spent 7 years going broke. And at the end of 7 years, I sold everything that I had and went to work selling insurance. And then as a result of that, I've been selling insurance for 56 years. And had several offices in different states and did quite well in the insurance business.
Now, that house you were building, is that across from the Rank home place?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's still there, and
Yes.
coincidentally, it's a cars
Yes.
dealership now.
Yes.
Getting
Yes.
your old trade in.
Yes.
Now, have you stayed in contact with any of the friends you made overseas?
Well, I used to, but they've all passed away. And I'm the only one that I know of left from the group that I was close friends with.
Now, are you a member of any sort of veterans organizations?
Yes, I'm a member of the Disabled American Veterans, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Roscoe Enlow Post number 5. And I've got a 54-year membership with them.
No. Well, I guess we've already covered what you did since separating from the military. Now, how did your experiences there in the military affect your life?
Well, I really benefited from the military. I learned discipline very early, and I also took a lot of things for granted when I was living at home. My mother fed me, she washed my clothes, she ironed them, hung them up, and anytime I was going somewhere, I just went in the wardrobe and got my clothes out, and I never give it a thought how those clothes got cleaned and ironed and all that. But as soon as I got in the Army, I found out. And so you learn a lot, and you learn discipline. At home, when you're a teenager and you're 16 or older, you do a lot of things on your own, sometimes that your parents don't quite approve of. And so I found out that discipline is, it's good for you. I think that all youngsters should have a short stay at least in the military to learn discipline. It really would help them. Nowadays, it seems to me like there's a lack of discipline, and a lot of bad information that people get, and a lot of bad traits like alcohol and drugs and smoking. And none of those things help you, really. So I think they all need discipline.
Now, are there any particular life lessons you would say that you learned while there, apart from what we just covered?
Well, yeah, there's quite a few. First of all, you got to stand on your own 2 feet. When you're growing up, you get an idea that mom and dad will always take care of you, and that's not true. And they're going to age and finally, of course, die. And someday you got to stand up for yourself, take care of yourself. I believe that's one thing.
That's a big thing.
Yes. Now, another thing that I developed was a great admiration for the flag of the United States of America. And I can't tell you what it does to me when I see on television people standing on the flag, burning the flag. I think that that's something that deserves some special treatment for them. I think we're so blessed to live in this land of the United States and have all the blessings and benefits that we have on an everyday occurrence, and to be disrespectful, for an example, like at a sports game when the
Players took a knee. So to
yes,
speak.
when the flag is, when we sing the American
The anthem.
the anthem, for someone to just get down on their knee, and it has nothing to do with race, it has to do with that person. They should be reprimanded in some way. So they need to realize how blessed they are. And how you get that across to them, I don't know, other than like the NFL could have a ruling that if somebody's down on their knee, they're out. Maybe that would get their attention.
Now, how did your service affect your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I think the military is a good thing and necessary. War, a lot of times, various things cause war to happen. And as we read in the Bible, there's been wars since the beginning of time. So I guess we're always going to have a war here or there. But if you would get the people who are responsible for it up front, we probably wouldn't have near as many as we have right now. It's a terrible thing to lose somebody as a casualty of war. I've never, of course, come into contact with that, but that would be horrible. But the thing is, we have what we have here in these United States because millions and millions of veterans have reported for duty and given their life for the protection that we have right now and we're enjoying. Now, many people have no idea what that's all about, and so somehow the veterans organizations and schools really need to keep that before people so that they have some idea what it is.
What message would you like to leave for those future generations who encounter this interview, whether it be an audio or a video, and hear what you have to say?
Well, I really don't know how to put it into words. Sometimes we don't realize how blessed we are until it's too late. And they should experience something so that they don't have all of the blessings that we enjoy today, so that they appreciate them when they do have them. Now that don't make a lot of sense probably, but I can remember back when I was growing up, we had no electricity, no water. We had a cistern, and there was no refrigerator. When you woke up at night and needed to go to the bathroom, you needed to slip on some clothing, go outside and go down a path to the little house that was out in the back. And if there was snow on the ground or rain coming down, so be it. That's the way it was. We had no, right now you just go over to the light switch and flip the switch and you got lights. We didn't have that. We had a metal can with some wood matches in it, and we had to find that can if it needed light and get a match out and strike it, and you'd have match lights so that you could light the lamp. And we had kerosene that we'd pour in the lamp, and you always had to trim the wick and clean the globe so that you could see by it. And by the way, that's how we did our homework and stuff too. Now back in those days, we just had a very small one-room school. And of course nowadays, they have a consolidated school and school buses. Now, we just had that small school, and we had to walk to school, no matter what the weather. Now, you run out very quickly and get on the school bus, you know. See, times have changed so much, it's very difficult to put this into words so people could understand it. But we are so blessed.
So in other words, count your blessings.
Yes, yes.
Now, is there anything that you find that we haven't covered here in the interview, or anything you'd like to add?
I think that pretty well says it.
All right. Now, were there some documents you brought with you today that you wanted to show? Got your Army folder with your